Congratulations, The Hunt, a documentary about big cats in Australia. This is incredible. Are they real? Is it true? There are just so many questions, or do we have to watch the documentary before this happens?
Well, yeah, we don't want to give away the ending, but yeah, look, there's literally thousands of sightings happened across tens of thousands of sightings that happened across the last over a century. So yeah, we believe that they're out there, and yeah, in large numbers too. Well, not super large numbers, but they're definitely out
Wow.
there.
So, big panthers?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different species that are reported. Here in Victoria and more so up the east coast of Australia is the melanistic leopard, which is and also known as the black panther.
Hmm.
And then more so in Western Australia, they have more reported sightings of cougar. So cougar is also known as a mountain lion or a puma. Um, so yeah, different, and not to say that those animals don't get sighted on the other side of the country, but it's just more common for them to be reported that way.
Hmm. Amazing. And
Yeah.
would you say that you've actually had an interest in cats for a long time? As I recall earlier, we were having a chat, and you were saying that this is something that you've actually been, it's been in your life for quite some time.
Yeah, definitely growing up in Geelong, which is sort of on the on the edge of the Otway Ranges down here in just 100 k's sort of southwest of Melbourne, is yeah, always lots of reported sightings, and I've always heard the stories of sightings, and it's always intrigued me. But then later in life, becoming a filmmaker, I just knew it was a story, like a genuinely Australian story that I wanted to tell, and I guess my interest wasn't necessarily in big cats, the animals themselves, more about the mystery element and the story behind it. And when I started looking into it, I found that no one was really doing much on a governmental level to try and prove it, but there were these group of independent researchers that were just fascinating people that have pretty much dedicated a couple of them at least 4 decades of their life to trying to bring the proof to this phenomenon or mystery, whatever you want to call it. Um, and yeah, they I sort of found that their story is the most interesting part about the whole thing. Really, it's a bit of a roller coaster ride for those guys for sure.
Yeah. So you've done so well with this story. Can you just take us back? Just I think you were saying about 4 years ago that you actually started to actually, you know, do some recordings and trying to do some research about this, trying to
Yep.
pull this all together. So how did this? How did you actually pitch to Ruby Entertainment?
Well, yeah. So I think I started just by reaching out to some of the researchers out there and doing some preliminary interviews with them and talking to a couple of people that had sightings and getting some of those sightings on camera. But and at that point, we were already sort of teamed up with Ruby to do Rostered On, which I spoke about before, which we've now done 2 seasons of. Um, and it just sort of seemed like we were such a good team and worked well together that it seemed like a great fit to keep it going. So we cut together from the preliminary footage and stuff we had a bit of a trailer, and then decided to go for production funding from Screen Australia and from Victoria. And yeah, so being at the stage we were in our careers, myself and my business partner Ryan Chamley, we aren't available for that type of funding or the funding we got for Rostered On without experienced producers on board. So Steve and Mark were involved in helping us secure funding for Rostered On because we teamed up with them, and then again that was the next step, teaming up again to secure funding for the Hunt. And it wasn't just because we wanted them to get us money or anything. We actually have quite a good working relationship and get along really well, and we think we both bring you know different perspectives to projects and stuff. So it's a really good sort of working team. And Steve will probably tell you, but he's actually had some sightings. He's one of his family members had some sightings of big cats over 15 years ago. Steve.
Probably about 15 years, 12 or 15 years ago. That's correct, and that
Mm.
is kind of how I connected into the history that Stu has told you there. Um, because we had, as Stu said, been working on Rostered On, which is a comedy series, a narrative comedy series, which first of all went up on YouTube and it was created and directed by Stu's business partner Ryan Chamley, and Stu was a cinematographer, and the guys shot that series themselves on their own money in their own time, and they brought it to us for some advice, and by us I mean my business partner and I. Um, they brought it to us for some advice as they were editing that first series of Rostered On, which they'd self-made, and they just showed us some footage, and it was just so funny and so beautifully put together that we immediately said, look, we're happy to help out. So that's how our relationship with Stu and Ryan started. So we completed that series and it went up on YouTube, did really well, and then we were fortunate enough to have Netflix notice how well it was doing on YouTube, and they licensed it, which was a fantastic experience. And that then kicked us off into a process of seeking money to do the second series of Rostered On. And it was during that phase that one day out of the blue, Stu produced and showed to us this little clip that he'd done, which was a kind of a trailer, an early version trailer, not the one that we have now, which I think you might show in a little while, Marcella.
I will.
But this early version of the trailer, which was just the most sensationally mysterious and attention-grabbing landscape of the Otway Ranges and sense of mystery of are there big cats out there. And I immediately connected with it because, as Stu referred to, about 12 years ago, probably 15 years ago, you're correct, Stu, my son had a sighting of such a thing in the Otway Ranges.
Wow.
But he didn't tell me till 5 or 6 years after it had happened to him. And the context of that was that at the time I was producing a show for the ABC called Bed of Roses, and it was set in a little country town. It was a kind of comedy drama, and we did an episode about a sighting of a big cat in the bush up behind the town that was part of the series. And one particular night while we were writing the scripts for that episode, I went home and my son said to me, what did you do at work today, Dad? And I told him that we'd been writing a script about a big cat sighting up in the bush behind the town. And he went white and he started shaking almost. And I said, what's the matter? And he just said to me, looked me straight in the eye quite fearfully and said, I've seen one of those. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, but I thought I was seeing things. But now that you're telling me that there are actually histories of these sorts of sightings, I'll tell you what happened to me. And he then took me back to a family holiday we'd had down in the Otway region about 5 years before that. And he told me that he'd been on a bushwalk one afternoon up behind the holiday house, which was in the bush out in that region. And he walked down this track and he came around a corner and he said he saw a huge black cat just staring at him on the track. And I immediately said, this is a feral cat, wasn't it? How big was it? And I, said, feral cats can get that big, can't they? And he said, no, it wasn't that big. And I said, what do you mean? How big was it? And he extended his hands out fully like that. And he said it was that big. It was absolutely huge, bigger than the biggest dog. And he said, I just froze in terror for 10 seconds and I ran back to the house. And by the time I got back there, I did a double take and I thought to myself, did I really see that? And I was too scared to tell everybody on the family holiday for fear that they'd laugh at me. And I've never told anybody since until this 5-year mark later when I was telling him about this show that I was working on. So many years after that, Stu showed me his trailer and I immediately remembered all that and thought, we have to do this doco. And we've got lots of other anecdotes like that one that I've told you of people who have had these experiences, and they're pretty hard to refute, aren't they, Stu?
Yeah, and it's so crazy because everyone's describing the exact same animal in the exact same way, and it's as you said, very hard to refute when so many people are reporting the exact same thing.
So when you're actually making and you're filmmaking, because the documentary is so different to a television show or a short film or anything you're actually producing, but the storytelling is the same because you've got a middle, you've got a beginning. You've got a beginning, you've got a middle, and you've got an ending. And so
you've got a cliffhanger.
okay, that's different. I haven't heard of that. What's the cliffhanger?
You'll have to watch the documentary, Marcel.
Okay. I'm trying to pull it out of you. Okay, so when you have all these obstacles and you're trying blocks and then you come and there's like the front of the line and you've got a plan, you've got your outline at the beginning, but it never looks the same at the end. So you've got all your blueprints, and then they change along that line. Can you tell me the process, how it's sort of all the obstacles that you've gone through, and if you can actually just take me through that journey?
Yeah, like I definitely, given the nature of the subject as well, I didn't, I had lots of plans starting out, and I wasn't sure exactly which one was going to be the right one. You know, I wanted to go into depth exploring the origin stories and how they got here, and that's just, you know, a bit of a trap to fall down because it's quite hard to prove how they got here. There's many different reasons why they could be here. I wanted to, you know, at one stage I wanted to prove it myself. At one stage, all these different ways it could have gone, and all these different sightings we could have included, and that kind of thing. But I kind of the strong through line that kept coming back to is that it's just as much about the researchers and their sort of journey as it is about the cats themselves. So basically, when it came time to, during the filming period, my plan was just to spend as much time with the guys as possible and let them dictate, as far as what we filmed and what we wanted to be as genuine as possible, the hunt for the big cats part of it, that we just basically strapped in and wherever they wanted to go. Like if there was a sighting in Western Australia, we're like, all right, we'll go to Western Australia. If there's a sighting in Newcastle, all right, we'll go there. So basically we let it was as real as it could possibly be, because we were following sightings as they happened. If there was a sighting in Newcastle, we'd be there the next day. If there was a sighting back in the Otways the next day after that, we're straight back down there. So that style of filmmaking is quite hard. Hard to be that sort of fluid with plans and all that kind of stuff. So we just have to just let it unfold. And I guess once we got to like a lot of that sort of beginning, middle, and end, we didn't really know exactly what it was until we had it in the bag, and we're like, oh, well, that's the end. Let's and a lot of that sort of figured out in the post-production process. I mean, I think we probably spent I can't remember how many months filming it and went through how many different versions of how we would present it. But yeah, I guess that's the sort of the trouble with, or the joy of doing a documentary like this, is that you sort of at the whim of how it all turns out, and you can't plan that much because you just don't know. You just have to be prepared to film what's unfolding in front of you, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean,
I think we'd probably edited 40 different versions.
Wow.
Version 40 we're up to.
That's amazing. How would you actually, because you've got your characters, you've got these people who are basically telling the story for you, and you've got to do so many interviews. And how do you get them comfortable to actually just relax and tell you what you actually need to know? Do you have to get to know these people, or do you have to go to their houses? Do you have to hang out with them for a couple of days, or are they quite easygoing that these researchers, you could just sit down with them and have a chat?
I guess with the researchers side of things, I as I sort of said, I met them probably 4 years ago, and even with that, in that preliminary stage where we weren't doing a lot of filming, we weren't actually filming for the actual production. I was still going out with them, investigating sightings just out of personal interest and doing a little bit of filming. So yeah, that build up of the relationship, which was crucial for getting them to open up and talk to me freely about not just the research side of things, but the journey that it takes them on and how hard it is. That sort of happened organically. But with people that have had sightings, like the real people that we interviewed that had sightings, that was always hard, because we might have got a call from them at 9 o'clock one night, and we were there at 9 a.m. the next morning, on talking about their sighting. So, and I think that's one part about this whole subject, is it has to be the right person to have the sighting, because a lot of people that have the sighting, like Steve's son, doesn't say anything about it, and it's not always the person the person that has the best sighting might not be the person that reports it or wants to talk on camera about it. So
Mm.
trying to make those people that have had sightings feel comfortable enough to tell them is a hard thing. And another part we did, we during the filming process, we put out to our Facebook group. We've got a following of probably, I don't know, 4,000 people or whatever it is, but they're all really interested in the topic, not necessarily just the film. It's more, they send in sightings and stuff that we can investigate. We put out to them, how about everyone who has had a sighting and can make it to Geelong comes down on a day and you can tell your story to camera. So we had, during that time, we probably had, well, we would have liked more, but at the same time, we're conscious of the fact that not a lot of people like to tell their story or be on camera. I think we got about 25 people in the end coming down and telling the most genuinely haunting stories about how they had these face-to-face encounters with these animals. And I think like those sort of witness testimonials were some of the most exciting. And you've probably seen a couple in the trailer. They're the most exciting parts of the film, is hearing these people talk about it so genuinely.
Mm. And can you tell us a little bit about one of the most daunting stories that you've heard?
So one guy, Peter, in the intro, and he was part of that witness testimonial day we had in Geelong. He was saying he came around a corner. His wife and his kid was walking ahead of him, and he came around the corner, and they're walking through the bushes, stalking behind his wife and kid, because he was a little bit further back, was what he could only describe as a cat the size of a German Shepherd. And as soon as he came around the corner, it turned, it looked at him, looked back at the family, and then basically took off. So he said if he wasn't there, he thinks if he wasn't there, that it could have gone totally different. He was on the verge of tears whilst telling the story. It was amazing.
Gosh, that's so scary. I don't know what I'd do.
We won't just make the whole story about that guy, because he was such a good storyteller of his sighting.
Yes. And so just in regards to anything that you would actually do differently, so for instance, in an ideal world with all the money in the world for, let's just give it that. I know this is an amazing show, but what would you have changed?
Oh, I think if we had more money to, I guess when we were investigating, we weren't pushing the story or pushing the investigations. We were literally just following one, sometimes three, but usually just one, Born King, the younger of the researchers. We were pretty much just following him as he researched. We weren't sort of getting involved, a little bit. We're helping out, but we weren't getting too far involved. So, he was one guy with an arsenal of maybe 10 of these camera traps. So, which are like emotion censored traps, and basically the backbone of their research is they'll go to a place where a sighting is, set up camera traps, leave them for an extended period of time, go back and check them, and hopefully if they get the animal they want on camera, they'll go back and continue that process until they get the right, they can collect DNA. So if all the money in the world, we would be doing that everywhere with thousands of cameras. That like the research part would be a little bit different. We'd approach it a little bit differently if we got involved, but given the nature of the budget and the style of the filming, we basically just were more like a fly on the wall type arrangement. I mean, there's technology out there these days in thermal imaging and long range drones and stuff that could have been helpful. We did explore that a little bit, but it was just too expensive we only sort of could sometimes afford to do 1 or 2 hours of flying, and it was just a little bit hard on a smaller budget. But with all the budget in the world, there's plenty of things, and I'm looking towards trying to develop this into a series or into a sequel or whatever it may be, and hopefully with a much bigger budget that we can do those kind of things.
Yes, amazing. So, Stephen, what was because I mean, you've had so much experience behind with, going for funding, and was it a long process to get that money?
Yeah, look, it did take a while. One thing I've learned over that now quite long career, looking back, I can't believe it's 20 plus years, but is that the thing that always wins the day when it comes to funding is a really good story. So you can have all the kind of technical facility you like, and you can have kind of brilliant on-camera people, and you can have all sorts of things that are brilliant about it, but unless the story itself has a grab factor, it won't get through the funding system. And immediately, as per how I described seeing Stu's first trailer, this was obviously a fantastic story. But even with that, I think it probably took at least a year to get the funding together. Because it is quite an exhaustive process. And a key to getting funding for any television show is that you've got to get your television network on board first.
Yes.
Because all the other funding systems, like Screen Australia, the federal government body, and Film Victoria, the state government body, and others like that, they won't come on board your project unless you've got a television network first. So we went through a process of pitching it to different television networks over probably a 4 or 5 month period, and there were some quite interesting discussions. There were various networks who were interested for a while, then their interest waned, but eventually Discovery Channel said no, which was a bit disappointing because we thought that was the best home for it. But then a few months later, they had actually a change of organisational management, and we reapproached them again, and they said yes, which was a fantastic outcome. But it had probably taken us 6 months to get to that point. And then once we had them on board, we could apply to Screen Australia and we could apply to Film Victoria. And just the application process for each of those bodies takes many, many months. And then you throw in a Christmas break in there where everything gets delayed by 2 months effectively. It's not long before you've added up a year before you have finally got the finance together. So I would say that it pretty well took that amount of time to get it all together. But once all of those parties were on board, they were really on board. They became quite excited about the story, and there was a moment there where all of a sudden it was all systems go with the finance, which meant that we could really start the filming proper. And that's when Stu was able to engage Vaughan, bring Vaughan down to the Otway, start setting the camera traps up and doing all the work that you see in the documentary.
Amazing. It's sensational. Shall we check out the trailer and have a little watch? And then go into maybe some questions if there's anyone out there still with us.
We might just be talking to ourselves here.
Yeah, I know.
That's cool. That's what I feel like I'm doing all the time anyway.
Yeah, that's right. So, I've got some questions for you, Stu.
Oh, yeah, good.
Okay.
Hopefully not financial ones. I don't want to answer them.
I'm sick of that.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll go in and then we'll take some questions. Thank you.
Okay.
One stage recently, I'd walked down a track in the sand. When I turned around and came back, there were cat prints in my boot marks. He tracked me out. Never saw him.
What I saw that day stirs me up a bit. I glanced to the right, 5 metres away, was an animal looking at my family.
One of the great mysteries of the Australian bush is the reported sightings of big cats.
Look at it.
There's this wealth of secondary evidence, things like sightings, footprints and so on. You've got to have that definitive evidence to make it legitimate.
I believe we have an extant population of exotic big cat out there, most likely mountain lions and black leopards.
They're very elusive. They're very people savvy. They don't seem to be afraid of people.
These animals are apex predators. They are good at what they do.
They'll take the throat out in one bite. They'll break the neck.
Always try and set multiple cameras in one area, just as a bit of a backup. Bobcat urine, you want the base of the breeze to come through, hit that scent.
Wait, there's an eye.
Out there, go, do it again, out there. You can see it's full of these little black furs.
2 puncture marks either side of its neck. There's no mess. Just a straight, clean kill as though you've done it yourself and gutted the animal. What on earth else in the Australian bush does this?
I mean, you imagine the kudos that would go with you being on the front line and go, we've got it.
To be so close to it, to look into its eyes, to see how big it was, to see how black it was, it shook me up. I was scared.
As far as we know, nobody's been injured. An awful lot of people go missing. I think it's about average of 7 a year in Victorian bushland, and they're never found, ever.
I'd just like to solve this before I die. That's all.
Wow. I can watch that all the time.
It's a pretty exciting trailer. I
It
can't
is.
imagine you wouldn't want to watch it after that.
Yeah, no, it's and I'd have to say that Stu and Brendan Weston, who's the editor, have put so much time into the whole project, but to that trailer, there's so much work in it, and that's why it's packs a punch.
Yeah.
Definitely.
We've got a few questions here from our audience. Okay, so let's see. How do you think they've got here from wartime? I think that's what I've heard previously, but I'm not sure if you agree with that. And that's Helen Paul.
Well, there's a few different, very plausible, in my opinion, origin stories. And so, as I said in the film, we don't try and investigate that side of things because it felt like it was a bit of a futile search to try and prove how they got here. But yeah, basically US servicemen stationed here in World War II were said to have had many stories of people seeing these US servicemen, particularly in the Grampians area, like Nil, releasing these cats or having mountain lions as mascots and then being told to release them after or destroy them when they were sent off to war. So, and they're rumoured to have been let loose. My sort of favourite origin story is sort of the unregulated animal trade of the early sort of 19th century. Like, you know, if you had money and had the means to get a big cat and wanted to have one, there's no one to say that you couldn't have one as long as you knew how to get it and could be bothered. That was totally above board. So, you know, and having no database of where these things were or how many there were, those things could have got let loose or escaped or whatever. The other sort of theories are circus troops travelling throughout the night, you know, having crashes or losing animals. I doubt that kind of stuff, again, in the early 19th century would have ever been bothered to be reported if they lost an animal and couldn't get it back. I don't think they're worried tarnishing their reputation by reporting it to authorities or anything like that. So yeah, there's different theories, and people have spent a lot of time trying to prove which one's the origin stories, but most of the researchers don't try and get bogged down in that because, as I said, like it's almost impossible to prove how they got here, but proving that they are here is possible.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, Anita Barnes, wondering what Stephen and Stu think should happen next. Should the government investigate these roaming cats?
I think someone should give us lots of money to make a sequel is what I think should happen next.
That's correct.
But I don't know. I don't think the government have done a couple of investigations, both here in Victoria and in New South Wales, into basically just pressures from the public to investigate them, and they've called them both the desktop investigations because they've spent some money investigating what evidence existed up until this point, and they deemed that it wasn't necessary to spend money on an investigation that went out into the field. So they have put the bare minimum effort into trying to prove that they're out there, and I don't think you know, they will go to the effort unless that definitive proof. Or maybe after the documentary they will. I don't know. Maybe they'll see it and millions will be spent on government investigations.
I mean, one of the key interview subjects in the documentary was once a government official who did make official investigations at one stage, you know, some years ago now. But he articulates that there was never quite the resources to make that extensive. Now, fast forward to now, whereas Stu has mentioned that there's thermal imaging technology, for instance, which is hugely expensive, but which might be the sort of thing which could really kind of ramp up the research capacity. But does the government, any government authority or any private enterprise authority want to spend the money doing that at this stage? And the answer's been no. Meanwhile, sighting after sighting after sighting happens all the time. As one of our other interview subjects mentions, that in parts of the US where pumas are, and mountain lions and cougars are known to exist, people who live in the regions where they are known to exist spend their whole lives living in those regions and never see one, even though their existence there has been proved in the past, which goes to make the point that these animals are very, very, very elusive, even when it's been proved that they're there. So I guess what this gets to is that the research has never been undertaken on a full scientific scale here, and that's why we're at a bit of a cusp. We'd like to make more documentaries about this and make a series, but as Stu said, this might provoke greater scientific interest in the topic.
Now, I'm not seeing any more questions. Does anybody else have any more questions for us? I'm trying to have a look here, see if there's anything.
Belinda, your fiance is laughing at us on the chat comments here, Steve.
Oh,
yeah. Has Belinda got a question?
Do you think this is funny, Belinda? Do you? Okay.
Belinda's my partner, people, for my fiance, indeed.
When's the wedding?
Hi, Belinda. When's the wedding?
Yes.
We're in lockdown. We're not allowed to have a wedding now.
How many people can come to your wedding if you did do it?
Well, I think you can only have 10.
10.
Yeah, and they'd all have to be like 2 meters apart.
Someone said, "What about Tasmania?" Well, look, there are still, and these researchers also get sightings of the Tasmanian tiger as well. So they're not usually as interested in looking into that. I don't think they don't want to, but just they've spent their time dedicated to proving big cats are there, so they don't tend to divert their attention too far. But they're definitely interested in it for sure. And there are a lot of people down in Tasmania trying to prove that they're still out there as well. And there are sightings on mainland Australia of thylacine regularly, so who knows?
She says, so rugged out there. Have there been any sightings?
In Tasmania?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's regular sightings of thylacine and of black leopards down there, yeah. We never got a chance. As I said, we sort of only really investigated a recent sighting, even if it was... we tried to focus on stuff that happened in 24 hours because that gave us the highest chance of finding some kind of DNA evidence that was worth investigating and would become a through storyline of the film. So, plenty of sightings from all over Australia, but we just sort of had to wait until, not necessarily the right one, but just a recent one that was worth the time and resources to go and check it out. But I love Tasmania. I'd love to go investigate some sightings down there. Me and Vaughan were talking about that today, actually, Steve. We should make sure we get to Tasmania next time.
Oh, definitely. I mean, we've really just scratched the surface with this, because we've been to a couple of regions like the Otways, which is a hot spot in a way, and Western Australia, which is another hot spot, and then around Newcastle in New South Wales. But there are all sorts of other places where sightings have taken place, and we just haven't had the resources to go there and investigate it fully in a scientific way. So if we're able to escalate our activities on the back of this documentary, and everybody tuning in to watch it on Foxtel next Tuesday, we'd really like to be doing lots more of this sort of research and filming, because as I said, we've only scratched the surface.
Yeah, can't wait. Yes, well, thank you so much. I don't think we've got any more questions. So we're certainly very excited to watch The Hunt. And yes, hopefully we'll have you back on Screen Chat to chat about your future projects after COVID-19.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Marcella.
Thank you so much. Have a great night. And I'll
Good
leave
night,
you
everybody.
With The Hunt again.
Guys,
see ya.
Yeah, that's it.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Hello, can you hear me, guys?
One stage recently, I'd walked down a track in the sand. When I turned around and came back, there were cat prints in my boot marks. He tracked me out. Never saw him.
What I saw that day stirs me up a bit. I glanced to the right, 5 metres away, was an animal looking at my family.
One of the great mysteries of the Australian bush is the reported sightings of big cats.
Look at it. There's this wealth of secondary evidence, things like sightings, footprints and so on. You've got to have that definitive evidence to make it legitimate.
I believe we have an extant population of exotic big cat out there, most likely mountain lions and black leopards.
They're very elusive. They're very people savvy. They don't seem to be afraid of people.
These animals are apex predators. They are good at what they do.
They'll take the throat out in one bite. They'll break the neck.
Always try and set multiple cameras in one area, just as a bit of a backup. Bobcat urine, you want basically the breeze to come through, hit that scent.
Wait, there's an eye.
Out there, go, do it again, out there.
You can see it's full of these little black furs.
2 puncture marks either side of its neck. There's no mess. Just a straight, clean kill as though you've done it yourself and gutted the animal. What on earth else in the Australian bush does this?
I mean, you imagine the kudos that would go with you being on the front line and go, we've got it.
To be so close to it, to look into its eyes, to see how big it was, to see how black it was, it shook me up. I was scared.
As far as we know, nobody's been injured. An awful lot of people go missing. I think it's about average of 7 a year in Victorian bushland, and they're never found, ever.
I'd just like to solve this before I die. That's all.